Our next presenter is Chen Kertcher. Chen Kertcher is a lecturer in the Department of Middle Eastern Studies and Political Science at Ariel University. He's the head of the unit for public diplomacy and foreign policy research at the Middle East and Central Asia Research. He is an associate editor of the Journal of National Resilience, Politics, and Society. Dr. Kertcher is engaged in social and cultural activities. His main fields of research are international politics and security, comparison studies of conflicts, discourse, and narrative analysis. Ben?
Yes, thank you. The floor is mine?
Yes.
And all of you can see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay, let's just see that. Okay, can move. Okay, that's great. Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me today. I think this session today is very important because I just heard of what Janan had to say and what I have to say. And I think that all of us who are participate in this conference are thinking about the women in Afghanistan and what's going to be with them. And this is something that is being, I think, currently it's overlooked and not, or at least not being discussed so much. And I think this is a great failure. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to present a paper that me and my colleague, Onat Turin from Golden College, actually it's a neighbor of you at Haifa. And we are working for the past year or so on the question of gender stereotypes. And this is a study that we began, and I'm going to explain to you. And of course, if you have a question after my speak, or perhaps later on after all of the presentation, I will be more than glad to hear your notes and ideas, because I think that we all are here to advance research and knowledge. So I think that Janan did a remarkable presentation by showing us the gaps, different gaps that we can see in gender equality between women and men, especially in the Middle East. Now, Onat and I, when we decided to address this issue, we thought about what else can we contribute, and we think that not enough is being written on the question of stereotypes. We have on an economy, social, of course, politics, but not enough is being written on stereotypes. And we decided to see how we can address this issue and try to contribute and give some new ideas and thoughts on the topic. Now, all these questions are related to the international human rights regimes. Of course, when we're thinking about equality and rights and opportunity, we tend to think that this is something that is natural, but actually this is a construction, a Western construction that is being perceived as a universal endeavor, that we should advance things like child's rights, racial, of course, to eradicate racial discrimination, etc. And we are focusing, of course, only on the question of women. Now, there are different studies on women and gender, but the majority of them are remaining at the state level or local community level. And probably all of you are familiar with different types of these studies. Onat and I, we decided to address the global level and see what they have to offer to give or illuminate new ways to consider this issue. So in 1979, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against women, the Women Convention was ratified. And in 1982, the Committee for Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, was being created. Now, CEDAW works, it addresses every year, we write different reports, discussion with different representatives of states. Because we wanted to address the question of stereotypes, we mainly used or address one topic from the list that Sadao addresses, and this is the question of stereotype, which is being addressed in these articles, to modify the social and cultural patterns of conduct of men and women to achieve the elimination of prejudices, customary, and all other practices on stereotype role for men and women. And again, listening to Janan, you just received, of course, the results of all this discrimination. So moving on, stereotypes. Well, stereotypes are defined as belief, symbolic representation or generalization about the nature of an individual based on his or her affiliation with the group. There are cognitive components, which are often they're latent, and prejudices are emotional product of stereotypes. And of course, there's a third way to look at it. This is discrimination, which expresses behavioral dimension. This is important because many times we look at and think of stereotype as something that we all can agree, and we establish it for us in order to address how Sadao is trying to diffuse its ideas to different countries. Now, when we're talking about gender stereotypes, what we're saying is that there are established idea on that women and men differ fundamentally, and therefore carry different social roles and depart in the way they are perceived in society. Again, just look at the Taliban now in Afghanistan and what's going on with women who had the job and work and never want to flee because they are something that the Taliban perceive as something that the women do not behave as they should behave. So this is a mixture of beliefs, of prejudices, and discrimination. And when we looked at it, first of all, Ornat and I, we said how usually in different states, gender stereotypes are being transformed. And we found 3 issues here. And again, this is a very long paper. I'm just giving you the pinpoints and you can ask later on. So there are 3 main issues that we can see to change the way society addresses gender stereotypes. These are law, education, and the media. So usually if we want to change the way people perceive each other in terms of gender, we will see a changing, like UNICEF called to do in the curriculum. And it's very specific to align it with different age group and to create different stories and different ideas in order to change the way we perceive these issues. So looking at it, we said that we need to look, first of all, to Sadao, its reports, its dialogue with states, then very specifically to go to the question of stereotype. And in stereotype, we want to address 2 issues that I will illuminate and elaborate very shortly. The question of concept, how they define, conceptualize what is stereotype in comparison to the academia. And the second issue is how do they operationalize the concept to states? Because it's one state to say that we all in favor of equality, and it's totally another way to say that how we should achieve this equality, especially when we're talking about stereotypes. So we wanted to look at different reports and see how they address these issues like law, education, media, and other social perceptions. Now, moving on. One of the issues that we saw in the literature review on this topic, that the majority of writers are on stereotypes. They're addressing specific states and writing down what is being achieved in these states. For example, in different countries, you could see a paper that is writing about the influence of Sadao in a certain state and the question of the right to divorce. Sadao and the question of the right to go to the universities. So these are the main issues. And this called for us to examine it in a fresh way. And how did we do it? We said we don't want to look at the level of state. We just want to look from the CEDAW perspective. So this is a study that just looked at the global level, what CEDAW say to countries, what it is recommend to countries. And only from this perspective, it's not just a study that's showing the interchanging of conversation between the states and CEDAW. So how CEDAW is doing a proselytism process. Proselytism, it's like a preaching to countries what they should do. And because we have the academic writing of how do we transform gender stereotypes, we know what to expect from such proselytism process to do. Some other writing, like a very important gender scholar called Swingle, she called it a translation process. How CEDAW translate to different countries the human rights norm of gender. It can be general gender, but again, in our studies is only about stereotype. Now, in our writing and reading, we saw that one of the main issues that is always coming forward is the question of Muslim societies. The majority of studies are agreeing that Muslim societies are more resilient to transformation, and especially in the question of stereotypes. Again, the stereotypes of women. Now, of course, when we're looking at the beginning of my presentation, when I talk about the human rights, we sometimes forget this is the liberal initiative. And cultural relativist scholar or anthropologist like Abu Lahud, which probably if you're in gender study, you probably heard of her, she warned us, for example, that it is problematic to construct the Afghan or Muslim women as someone in need of saving. When you save someone, you imply that you are saving her from something. You're also saving her for something. And this is a major issue here, because Abu Lahud is telling us that CEDAW is not just a neutral, strategic, political institution. It's an active institution that tries to transform the way society behaves globally. And it's this very, very interesting challenge that we had to study of what exactly they're trying to do and how do they address the question that in many societies, people do not want to change all their norms and traditions and culture just to be aligned with some global liberal norm. So this is a tension that is always there in the global level between the cultural relativism and something like called imperial or universal liberalism. So more concretely, what did we do? Well, we divided the study to two parts. The first part is focusing on how CEDAW perceives stereotypes. There are, in recent years, there are official documents that they disseminated to all countries, and they explain to different countries what are stereotypes, what are wrongful stereotypes, etc. And we compare these studies with the academic point of view on the transformation of stereotype. And the second question that we address is the question of the translation, more detailed translation process, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of the legal aspect, educational, media, and other that can actually do the transformation. So I'm not going to delve into many details. Again, this is just a very brief overview of a very long project. So what we found is the following. So first of all, the academic point of view on transformation of stereotype, it sees is again as a belief system that and again I have a belief systems, Janan and everyone else here have different belief system, and it's right. The main issue, of course, is when we transform it into prejudices and discrimination. And when we went to this academic approach, we saw that many times this is stereotypes are being valued, that this is a defense or a mechanism or a regular mechanism that everyone have to have in order to manage its personal life in the world. You cannot have a world devoid of stereotypes, at least according to the academia, if you believe us. And when we went to sit down and compared what is the academia point of view in comparison to sit down, we found several differences. So first of all, sit down tend to put a focus on the harm. It's try to differentiate between the way we perceive and actual harm to women. A second issue is when it's talking about harmful, it says that every harm should be eradicated. So, for example, if we say that women, or what our expectation of women, for example, it can be a harm and we should eradicate it. If we say that what is the custom regarding the role of girls in society, then it should be eradicated. So in this perspective, CEDAW is a very universal tool, a mechanism that which also explain why many Muslim society, or specifically states, are working a lot against its work. And what we see here is that despite of its action, one of the report, for example, and I quote, we have yet to consider what makes a gender stereotype harmful and what makes gender stereotyping wrongful. So despite decades of work, CEDAW still is not sure what exactly harmful, what exactly wrongful, what are we trying to achieve. And this is the body that is supposed to explain and report to countries how should they transform gender stereotype. And what we find is that the writing of CEDAW is very similar to legal writing. CEDAW is looking for action, is looking for a concrete wrong or something that's very perceivable, like physical violence, and we could see it later on the question of the operationalization. So, and what is more troublesome for us is that in no way in the report, CEDAW offered or suggested some positive ideas of an R-type ideal world that has no negative gender stereotype. It pinpointed an example, for example, of a woman being beaten by her husband, but it doesn't say this is a physical, it's not a belief, and it doesn't say exactly what is the ideal type. And we will see it later on in the operationalization process. So we identified, we read an overview, the 55 reports of CEDAW to Muslim countries in order to examine exactly what they did. And we looked at the main issues that they pinpoint. You see like how many times they mentioned positive image, or how do they explain positive image. Issues that were really surprising for us because we're talking about stereotype, and we saw a lot about genital mutilation, the physical eradication of genital mutilation. We clustered all these issues into the main topics: national policy, education, media, and harmful practice. And what you can see from CEDAW is that it's very superficial and in its report. So for example, we can see that many times CEDAW is calling for changing of school textbook, but this is the beginning and the end of this issue. It doesn't elaborate to which children, what exactly are this transformation, what are the expectations, what are positive school textbook. The same goes, for example, for the media. CEDAW mentioned in different documents that there is a problem in the representation of women, but it doesn't say how and when and in which media services and how to transform it. And I think the most surprising finding was about harmful practice. CEDAW is finding most comfortable in the physical harm, not in the stereotype cultural perspective. It mainly focuses on something that is viable, legal, and that is not related necessarily to stereotype. So for example, they mentioned the problem of forced marriage, female genital mutilation, honor killing, or polygamy, which is all of these are being mentioned in different other reports, which deal, for example, on women equality in the question of legal rights, voting rights, right of marriage, divorce, etc. So this analysis of the 55 reports gave us another finding that really surprised us, that there is a gap between the developed countries and less developed countries. CEDAW is almost ignoring a question of culture in the developing countries. So it mainly focuses on the physical aspect and not on the cultural. While in developed countries, Muslim developed countries, it mentioned cultural aspect like school textbook, data, but in all cases, it is not elaborating what they should do or how should countries address this issue. There are a few exceptions, but in generally, these are the rules. So just to conclude, we identified three main problems in the proselytism mission of CEDAW. First, it shifts the focus from direct assaults on belief and traditions and religion to list of physical practices. Second, it has a very poor operationalization of education and media. It ignoring accepted literature and other UN institution work such as UNICEF. Third, it has no model of success. So countries, Muslim countries, if they want to do something, they only receive the reports what not perhaps to do, but not what to do. And finally, in this case, we find that CEDAW, although officially, and if you will read the reports and go to the sites, international internet sites, and in different public speaking, you will hear its directors always say that there are a mechanism for universal international human rights to advance women's rights and equality all over the world. In practice, its proselytism practices allow countries to maintain their culture and belief system that nourishes negative stereotypes of women. And I think this is the situation that we see, and it's also explained why Afghanistan is such a great failure, and other countries such a great failure. Just only several months ago in Somalia, for example, elected supported by the international community, government in Somalia decided that a girl who had their period are allowed to be forcefully married. And I think this is something that we should not only look at the states, but also look at CEDAW level and the international level. I thank you very much, and I'm very hopeful for some useful comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Chen. It was very interesting. Is anyone has any questions? Okay, I would ask a small question, and I'm not sure if you have an answer for that, but I wonder if there is any research that shows the effective activity of CEDAW as for the status of women before and after this activity started.
Well, thank you very much for the comment. I love questions. It gives me time also to be in the spotlight. Okay. I think there is a very methodological problem in addressing this kind of question. because if you remember from the beginning of my presentation, I mentioned that Onat and I, we began from just to try to isolate one aspect. And this is a huge question of what is equality, how do we define it, and how do we address it? So for example, if I just take the cultural aspect, how do I define or analyze the perception of women in Egyptian, let's say, cinema? This is a huge study that can nourish, I think, a professorship in esteemed universities for decades. So I think this is a fascinating question, but we need an entire team of researchers and to decide about a methodology, which is a huge difficulty concerning this topic.
But maybe just take the years when some of CEDAW recommendation was published, and try to look the years before and after to see. I'm just thinking on the long run. I'm sure that it won't be the same year or year after, but if you take 10 years later and 10 years before, and try to put a benchmark on the middle, maybe it's a way to see it. It's interesting.
I will respond. Okay, so I began that Ornat and I were working on this. This is the beginning on the global aspect, and a next move will be to isolate different states, and in different states we can also see more about the dialogue between states and the international community. And I think your idea of taking this backwards and see this discourse at the, again, state level with the international level, we have to exclude different countries, and it's also a difficulty to decide which country are we going to assess in this process. But yeah, it's a great idea.
So I will just say you can take it also regional. Not only on country level, but Middle East, Europe, United States, Asia.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chen.